everyone, and welcome to our first episode of Coffee with Kirsten for high school youth group, where we're going to be doing short videos on your Bible basics and practical guide to reading the Bible. So you're at home in quarantine, you're at home with your Bible, now what, right? We have to learn how to read in English, so it's really important that we learn how to read the Bible. So you have your Bible in front of you, but we're missing a really important first step, and that's translation. So translation is something we don't talk a lot about because it's scholarly and it's high-minded, but it's actually really important for us lay people to talk about. So the Bible is translated into over 3,000 languages, either in its entirety or in its whole. The English language alone has over 400 translations. 400. That's a lot of translations. So how are you supposed to know which one to read, right? Okay, Kirsten, I have 400 options in front of me. Which one is actually the best option? Get that question a lot. Well, it depends. So in order to answer that question, we need to look at how the Bible is translated. So translators take it from the original language, right? The Bible's written in 3 languages: Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. Aramaic is just half of Daniel and part of Ezra. So most is written in Hebrew and Greek, right? 2 or 3 languages that are very different from English, right? They don't have the same characters. Hebrew is written right to left instead of left to right. Huge differences, right? So when they start translating these, they need to figure out, how do I get it from the original language into our language, called the receptor language, right? How do I get it into English? Well, there's a lot that goes into this, and I'm not going to get into, it's called textual criticism. It's this whole big, but it really is a scientific process. You need to take very different grammar and syntax, like sentence structures, and put them into English so that they're easy to understand. Now, each translation has a purpose, right? And there's kind of a sliding scale of how they define these kinds of translations. So the first is called formal translation, and that is where we take the literal meanings of the words in the sentences, and we translate it from the original language to English. Now, this gives us a lot of really wonky language, inconsistencies, and it's really hard to read, but it preserves the original intent of the author really well, right? So this is really good for study, right? A lot of seminaries, or, if you're trying to study a specific verb or a word in the Bible, right? Formal translations are great for that. And then we move a little farther down the scale, right? In the middle is functional translations. Now, these translations try their best to preserve the original meaning, the original intent and grammar and syntax, but put it into words that we can kind of understand. So they try to kind of navigate understanding versus original meaning. This is probably the best kind of translation if you're just reading at home, because it's a little easier to understand, right? So they try their best to keep the meaning, but they tend to err on, is this easy to understand in English? On the far end of the spectrum, the last kind of guide is free or paraphrase translations. Now, these are translations that are just trying to make the Bible vivid, fun to read, easy to understand. These translations will pick creative words over meaning. So often there's a lot of extra words added in, and 2 sentences become a paragraph to kind of use descriptor words. But this is really good for somebody who's just learning how to read the Bible, or is just new to the Bible, right? They kind of want to just get into it and get excited about it. So now that you know kind of what the scale is, you're like, great, Kirsten, now what? I'm going to show you different kinds of translations on each of those scales. So we're going to kind of go down the scale here. And the first, for formal, is the ESV. KJV, King James Version. This is your most classic formal translation that you'll find in a home, right? There's a lot of them, but this is kind of the standard one. KJV is also written in a dead language, right? We don't speak Old English anymore. So I don't recommend the KJV for reading at home. It's a little hard to understand, and when they were translating this, they didn't have as good of manuscripts as we do now. So a good study guide, not a great reading at home by myself kind of thing. Great for comparative, not great on my own. Next, between functional and formal, we have the good old trusty ESV. So it definitely tries to make it a little easier to understand, but it keeps it kind of formal, right? I had a professor in college who always said the ESV is half translated. And that was kind of his funny way of saying, you know, it's almost there, but there's still a couple sentences that are hard to understand. There's some sentences you have to read 2 or 3 times. This is what I use for my personal study. I like the ESV. I like the way it's written. I'm comfortable with it. I don't recommend the ESV for people who don't like reading like Jane Austen, classical English literature, because that's kind of what it feels like. And the Bible shouldn't kind of drag like that, right? You should be excited about reading your Bible. So I really like the ESV, but it's not for everybody. And you're going to have to reread some things a couple times. You kind of got to stay on your toes with this one. Next, classic middle of the road. NIV, the trusty NIV. This should be like your go-to. NIV is the perfect example of functional equivalency. It does a really good job at keeping the meaning, but making it easy to understand. This is a great version to read at home. It is easy to read, it makes sense, the meaning comes across clear. There weren't too many liberties taken in translating, so the like author's meaning really comes across the same as it does in the original languages. Good, trusty version right here. Really recommend NIV Study Bible. It's a great place to start. Next, I'm going to have to do a full swivel here. NLT, great version for teens. This is between a functional and paraphrase. So it definitely takes some liberties with adding in a couple words or a couple sentences to make it easier to understand. But the NLT does a good job at keeping meaning. So this is a good version if you don't love reading. This version makes it fun to understand and fun to read. It adds some flowy language. It also makes meaning clear, right? You kind of want to just know what God's trying to say to you. This is a good version. I recommend this for new believers, middle school and high school students, even college students. If, you know, I still read the NLT at home. If I just want something that's kind of fun and I just want to sit with God, and like narrative stories in the Bible are really good to read out of this kind of thing. NLT, trusty version of the Bible, would recommend for home study. It's a good one to read at home. Next, the infamous example of paraphrase. Eugene Peterson's The Message. This was written to get people interested in the Bible, so it takes a lot of liberties with meaning, and it definitely picks flowy language over meaning. So a lot of times, like 2 sentences will turn into like a whole paragraph to add descriptor words and language and to make it contemporary, right? So it's definitely a free translation. This is the farthest end that you can go. So total opposite from King James. Now, this has some benefits. It's great for storytelling, right? It makes all the Bible stories sound very fun. Would I use this for interpretation? No. I wouldn't read this just for my home study either. It's a fun read. I really recommend it if you're reading it alongside something else, but I would recommend NLT way before I recommend the Message reading. Now, you're at home. I really recommend the Bible app so you can try out different translations, right? Don't feel like I'm a college Bible student, so I have a lot of different translations. Don't feel like you need to go spend your money. There's apps for that. So when you're reading at home, you should have one version that's kind of your go-to, right? So mine is ESV. That's what I'm comfortable with. That's what I like. And that's kind of where I connect with God, right? I feel connected with him when I read it. A lot of people pick NIV or NLT for this. Something that's comfortable. If you don't like the King James, don't read that for your personal study. Now, you're attending a Bible study. What should you bring? Multiple versions. The only time you should be reading one version is when you're reading to like sit and spend time with God. If you're doing a Bible study or any kind of, you're trying to find out what something's meaning, you need to use multiple versions. Don't think that you just need to read one and that's it, right? Like, I only read the ESV and that's what I'm going to stick with the rest of my life. Not true. Not true at all. It's good to have one version to help with memorization and getting used to the language, and you'll get more comfortable with it. But it's really important to read different translations because you're at the mercy of the translators, right? Somebody else has already gone to the trouble of deciding what the Greek and Hebrew meant and what words to use in English. So it's important to get the full meaning of the Bible to use multiple translations. So today I want to challenge you. Download the Bible app, go into the Psalms, pick any one, even Psalm 1 is good for this, and read it in the side-by-side translations, right? Pick a couple different translations. Try to pick something like the KJV and the NLT and read them beside each other, right? Pick a formal, a functional, and a free translation and read them. Have fun with it. There are so many different kinds of translations and they all serve a different purpose. And so they all read a little bit different. I love showing people Young's literal translation, the YLT. He wrote it for Greek study. He did the whole Bible by himself, which is crazy. And he translated each individual word instead of the accounting for the grammar and syntax of the whole sentence. So that one's kind of fun to read sometimes because it doesn't make any sense unless you're doing like a Greek word study. Look for kind of goofy ones like that. Have fun with it. Really, you can do this with any part of the Bible, but the Psalms are kind of fun because they're poetry, so people get pretty flowy with them, especially in like NLT and the Message. But that's my challenge for you and the passage I give you today. So that's all I got for today. Kept it under 15 minutes. So if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for stopping in with Coffee with Kirsten. I'll see you on Thursday where we're going to be talking about historical narrative in the Old Testament. I'll see you then. Bye, guys.